Ruddock loaded the pistol in the tack room where everyone could see him do it, because a thing like that ought not to be done in a corner, and by the time he had carried it down the row to the last box, Damaris Trewin was already sitting in the straw with the black gelding's head across her knees. "Get up, girl," Ruddock said, and his voice was not unkind, which was the worst of it. 30 days, Damaris said. She did not move. She only looked at him, level from the floor. Solomon was awake. His near eye was open, fixed on the man in the doorway. 2 days he had been down in the deep straw of the last box. The order lying on the Duke's desk called it mercy. That eye was not asking anybody for mercy. It was furious with the floor. Damaris had read this box the morning he went down. It told the whole 7 months in one look. Clean straw, a filled bucket, a shut door, provided for and left. Twice in the summer she had asked to go over him with her hands, and twice been told the Duke's order was absolute. Rest meant no handling and no disturbance. You could keep a creature alive that way a long while. You could not make it want to be. Ruddock let the pistol hang down against his leg. He did not come into the box. 30 years he had been stud groom in this yard. Nobody had ever sat down on the ground in front of him and refused to get up. He turned his head toward the row door, where the dairy boy was hovering. "Fetch his grace," he said. "Run." The boy ran. Ruddock stayed where he was, the pistol in his hand, because setting it down would have been a way of pretending. Ruddock did not pretend. That was why the yard trusted him. It was also why he looked ill this morning. Davy came down the row carrying a bucket. The bucket was empty. The bucket was his reason to stand at the door of the last box. Nobody looked into it. Nobody sent him away. He was plainly frightened. He stood there anyway with his empty bucket. While they waited, Ruddock hung his coat on the second peg by the harness room door, not the third, which nobody used. Clement, Duke of Nayland, came down the row himself, bareheaded in the October cold. He had signed the order before first light. He did not send it down this morning in another man's mouth. He came to stand behind his own signature. That was his idea of decency. Since March, it had frozen every room of his house. He stopped at the door of the last box. "You are Damaris Trewin," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." 12 years in my yard. 12 years, Your Grace. "Then you have seen enough to know this is not cruelty," Clement said. "He has been down 2 days. He was hurt in March, and in 7 months he has not come right. There's no mercy in letting him starve on his side in the dark. There's no mercy in it either way, Your Grace. There's only what we do with our hands." She eased the horse's head off her knees and laid it on the straw, careful of his eye, and got to her feet. "Before a beast is put down, let him be looked at out loud. That is no favour. No man in this yard would refuse it to a dog." The Duke did not refuse it either. He inclined his head once. "Look at him out loud, then." So she went along the horse's body to the near hind, the back leg on his left side, and ran her bare hand down it, hock to hoof. At the coronet, the soft band above the hoof where the horn grows from, she stopped and held her palm flat. "Heat," she said. "A foot with heat in it is a foot with trouble in it, and the band is tight. There's an abscess making in this foot, a gathering, like a boil shut inside a boot. It hurts him too much to stand on, so he has given up standing at all. That is pain, Your Grace, not an ending. Pain can be drawn." She felt her way over the whole of him. "No broken bone, no ruined joint that I can find. The gathering in the foot is fresh. 7 months shut in has wasted the rest of him. And if it is only a foot, Clement said, then why will he not so much as try? That is the right question, Your Grace. Give me the month, and I'll answer it. Clement looked at her for a long moment. What is it you are asking me for? Say all of it. 30 days, Your Grace, my own hours, so the yard loses no work by me. The loan of the yard's rope and the beam over this box. If he cannot rise from the straw and stand on his own 4 legs by the 30th morning, I will hold his head myself while it is done. Ruddock looked at the floor when she said that last part. Damaris did not. Her voice stayed level. The fear underneath it was real, and she let it be real. A woman who felt nothing would have been easier to refuse. What does he lack that 30 days would give him? A foot that doesn't hurt him, and a reason, in that order. Down the row a boy went by with the morning feeds, trailing the smell of warm bran through the cold. In the last box, Solomon lifted his head 2 inches off the straw and turned his ears toward that smell. Every person at the door saw him do it. An animal that is finished does not point his ears at breakfast. You have them, Clement said. Hear the terms, the rest of you, so they are said once and not argued after. No fuss is to be made of this. No hands come off their work for it. And on the 30th day the order stands as written. He said it evenly, to the yard at large. Then to her, in a lower voice, I am not doing this unkindly, Miss Trewin. I am the one who has to decide. There is nobody above me to do it instead. I know it, Your Grace. Davy found his voice at the door. Is he going to get up? I don't know, Damaris said. She did not dress it up for the boy, though it would have cost her nothing to be kind and rom. A bad foot could be mended. A reason was a harder thing to come by. That second part she kept to herself. The Duke turned to go. Ruddock straightened in the doorway. The pistol was in his hand, and there was nowhere for it to be. And what am I to do with this, Your Grace? Clement looked at the pistol, then at the woman already settling back down into the straw, lifting the black head onto her knees again, as if she meant to be there a month. Keep it loaded, he said. By the middle of that same day, the last box no longer looked like a place where anything was going to be shot. Damaris worked the morning through and said what she was doing while she did it, because a yard that understands a method will keep the method going while she sleeps. The bed first. She banked the straw deep and dry, right up the walls, so that whichever way the horse rolled, he would lie on clean bedding and never on stone. Then the foot. Ruddock pared the sole with his hoof knife and found no safe track to open. She would not dig blind. She boiled bran, packed it warm, not scalding, around the near hind hoof, and tied the whole of it up in sacking. A poultice, she said, for Davy's benefit and the audience of hands at the door. The heat softens the horn and draws the gathering down, so it can break out through the sole instead of festering shut. Fresh and warm, twice a day, till it bursts. Whenever he could hold himself breastbone down, she set the water pail where he could reach it. Only while he's upright on his chest. Flat on his side, a weak horse can take it into his lungs. The hay she wetted and offered in small handfuls only while he was upright on his chest. Wet, it's easier for a weak horse to manage. His legs she rubbed with her 2 hands, always upward, from the foot toward the body, and wrapped them in flannel. Blood pools in a leg that doesn't move. Rub it home and wrap it warm, and the leg stays a leg. Last, she stood in the middle of the box and looked up at the tie beam, the great oak timber carrying the roof over the stalls. I want the beam rope, and the wide canvas out of the wool room. A sling under his middle, hung from that beam, not to hang him in. No rope on earth should hold a horse off his own legs, to take a share of his weight when he tries to rise, so that trying stops costing him more than he has. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Ruddock went. The man who had loaded the pistol at first light walked the length of the yard, came back with the beam rope over his shoulder, and climbed up to rig it with her. "It's only a rope," he said, to nobody in particular. Nobody answered him. Everybody understood him. One thing wanted saying. Damaris said it once, while she worked, without looking at anyone. From March to October, nobody had been allowed near him but the second horseman with a fork and a bucket, because the house's word was rest, and rest is what killed him. Rest is right physic for hurt horses and hurt men alike. But nobody had poulticed that foot. Nobody had rubbed a leg, or walked him in hand, or opened the door for anything better than the fork and the bucket. Rest is standing wrapped and, once the hurt will bear it, walked and looked at, she said flat, to the box at large. What he got was left. The Duke came down again before evening, with his account's manner on him, and the sum already worked out. He would pay her properly for the month, he said, whatever figure she cared to name. "You can pay the yard. You can't pay me for him. If I'm paid for him, he's a job, and a job stops at dark. And what stops at dark instead? Nothing, Your Grace. That's rather the point of it." He looked at her a moment with something moving behind the frozen front of him. The household book called her a dairymaid, at £8 a year, and had called her that for 12 years, while the yard sent for her over every bad foaling and torn shoulder in the parish. She told him the rest of it plainly. She held her mother's cottage at the lane end under a lease measured on 3 lives, her own the last surviving life. So long as she paid the rent and kept its covenants, losing her place could not turn her out. Nayland work was paid per animal through Ruddock's stable account. Other yards paid her direct, at her own door. He was not offended. He was interested, and that was worse for him. He went back across the wide cobbled yard beyond the arch, the yard where the whole household gathered twice a year to be paid. Nothing at all had happened there since March. Damaris watched him go. 12 years of sick boxes had taught her one sorting for everything alive. What has been cared for, and what has merely been kept. The house beyond the arch was swept and punctual. So was the man walking back into it. Kept, she caught herself thinking, of a duke, and put the thought down like a hot pan. At dusk, they tried the sling. The sling failed. Solomon would have none of the canvas under his body. He threw his head, thrashed with the good hind leg, went white-eyed. Damaris called it off at once. "Enough. Out. We don't fight him. Not today, then. It goes better tomorrow, or it goes better the day after." She said it in front of the Duke, who had come back to the road door at the noise. The first thing he ever watched her do with her method was lose. Davy asked it while she was washing the mash bucket. "Have you ever done this before? Got one up that was down like him?" "Once," Damaris said, "and once it went wrong. Hold the light closer." That was all he got. Outside, the October light went early. In the last box, a lamp was lit. It did not go out before dawn, that night or any night after. "Day 1, Damaris said to the horse, when the yard had gone in to supper and the lamp was the only light on the row. "You've 29 after this one, so don't spend it lying on that same shoulder." Turning him was the worst of the work. It came every 3 hours, all night, every night. A horse left lying on one side crushes the lung under him and saws through his own hide. He has to be rolled, off the bad side, onto fresh straw, his legs brought over one at a time. She did it with the rope and her knee and her back and the whole of her weight, braced against 1/2 ton of horse in the dark. The first turn took everything she had. The second, at past midnight, took more than she had. She talked to him the whole while. Nonsense mostly. The weather, the price of oats, which of the hands snored loudest through the harness room floor. Not because he understood a word of it, because a horse alone in the dark has nothing to be interested in. An animal like that stops being interested in anything at all. It was company. It asked nothing of him. In a month of nights, she never once asked him for a thing with her voice. He never once did a thing because of it. "You needn't be interesting," she told him, somewhere past 2 in the morning. "You've only to be here in the morning." Then she settled at his head with her blanket around her shoulders, and did not go home to the cottage at the lane end. That was the picture, if anyone had come down the road to see it. One woman, sitting in the straw beside the Duke's condemned horse, in the small hours, on purpose. One. Twice in that first night, Solomon's head came up and turned, ears forward, toward the dark end of the box, toward the harness room door, where the coats hung on their pegs. Damaris followed the line of his look. The third peg was a shape in the shadows, no more. She looked at it a long moment, and said nothing at all. Near dawn he tried to get up. He did it on his own, without warning, the forelegs thrashing out, the whole wasted body heaving. It failed. The near hind would not come under him. He crashed back into the banked straw. The sound he made was rage, low and grinding, the sound of a creature that has been let down by its own body and cannot say so. Damaris kept her hands in her lap. Help too early teaches a horse that trying is somebody else's business. She sat on her own hands, 2 feet from him, while he failed at the one thing she wanted most in the world. It cost her more than the turning had. "You're angry," she said into the dark. "Good. Angry is alive." In the morning, with him propped upright on his chest, she fed him warm bran mash off her open hand, a mouthful at a time. 11 mouthfuls in 40 minutes. That was breakfast. She counted each one out loud and praised none of them. Up at the head of the row, half behind the door of an empty stall, the Duke of Nayland watched the whole 40 minutes without once making himself known. He had come down to ask a question about the order of things. He went away without asking it. The second night, Davy came. He came with his blanket rolled under one arm and a candle lantern. He stood at the box door, 13 years old, with a prepared speech. "I'm minding the lamp," he said. "It wants minding. It could go over in the straw, and then where would you be?" "That's 2 of us then," Damaris said. He sat down where the straw was banked against the wall, close enough to the horse's back to be warm and far enough to be out of the way of the legs, as though he had thought about it all day. They sat a long time before he said the other thing. "He put me up on my first pony, when I was 8. A breath of quiet went by. He'd walk me round the wash yard till my mother came shouting. Every evening, near enough. He used to—" Davy stopped himself. Whatever came next had a name in it, so it did not come. In this yard, since March, sentences bent around that name, the whole household's way. In the March floods, the Duke's young brother had ridden into the ford. The bank had given way under him. The black horse that came out of the water without him was Solomon. Damaris did not make him finish. She turned the lampwick down a shade and let the boy sit with his own remembering, and named none of it. "He still does a thing," Davy said at last, steadier. "If you stand near his head in a coat, he'll put his nose at the pocket, this one, the left one, like he's looking for something that ought to be in it. He did it to me in the summer, through the bars, before ever he went down. Looking for what? I don't know. It were never my coat he wanted." The lamp burned. The horse slept. The boy slept after him, sitting up, his head tipped back against the boards. Damaris sat awake between the two of them. When the 3 o'clock turn came due, she did it with Davy's small, blinking help. "Day 2, she said at the grey end of it, to the box in general. 28 days left. We'll want them all." The days that followed were work, stacked on work, with small wins buried in them, where only working people would look. The sling went under him at last on the 3rd trying. Damaris had spent 2 evenings letting him smell the canvas and hate it at his leisure. Once it was buckled and drawn up to the beam, it rubbed him behind the elbows. She padded it with washed sacking, twice a day, every day after. The first time the ropes took a share of his weight, the whole box heard his breathing change. Ruddock came each morning at first light, put his thumb flat on the coronet of the near hind, and said what his thumb found, out loud, so that the yard would know it was a true count. "Hot," he said. "Hot still. Hotter. It's gathering." Nobody asked him to do it. He would have bitten anyone who offered to do it for him. At the first bandage change of the week, the off hind had begun to fill out. You could see the leg becoming a leg again, the flesh coming back over the bone. Damaris showed Davy with his own hand on it. "There, that's feed and rubbing, that is. That's not nothing." The Duke came down to the row 3 times in those days. The first time, he stood in the passage shadow, watched her work, said nothing, went away unannounced. The second time, her hands were full of a horse's leg at 10 o'clock at night, Davy asleep against the wall, the flannel half wound, the lamp guttering on its crate. She could not leave the leg. "Hold the lamp then," she said, before she had thought about to whom she was saying it. "There, lower, where my hands are." So the Duke of Nayland held a stable lamp, where a dairymaid told him to hold it, 10 inches from her shoulder, for a quarter of an hour. The light fell on her hands. His breath moved the loose hair at her temple, once, twice, with the slow regularity of a man determined to breathe normally. She wound the flannel and counted the turns under her voice. 4, 5, 6. Lost the number entirely and had to begin the count again. She knew precisely why. She said nothing about it. When the leg was done and pinned, she looked up at last, because there was nowhere else left to look. The Duke was much nearer than a duke has any business being, the lamp steady in his hand, his eyes not on the horse at all. Neither of them moved. One whole held beat, the length of a swallowed sentence. Then Solomon shifted his weight in the sling, with a groan of lever. The light swung. The beat broke. Nobody named it. She had not been cold, and it was not the lamp that had warmed her. The 3rd time he came, he asked a question about the horse, the first thing he had wanted to know, of anyone, since March. Why the near hind and not the other? Because he's carried himself crooked since March to keep off it, and every day of rest made it worse. Rest is what we gave him. Rest is what did it. On his way out of the row, he passed the trough, where a lad had left the pump running. The water climbing toward the brim made its full, hurrying sound. The Duke stopped in the middle of the good night he was saying, all of him, until the pump was shut off. Then he finished the sentence and went. On the dark row his hand went out at hip height, a half moment, for a horse that was not there. Damaris watched, said nothing to anyone, filed it where she filed everything. He saw things, too, on those visits, because watching was what he had instead of helping. He saw her scour the horse's water pail before she washed her own hands, in that order, every time. He heard Davy ask her, straight out, whether the horse was going to live, and heard her give a 13-year-old the true odds, level and unhurried. Not good. Better than yesterday. No kind lie, though a kind lie was right there for the taking. He stood in the passage with that sentence going through him like a verdict on 7 months of his own conduct. Then the 9th day, and the night of the 9th day. She had the poultice off at midnight for its change. The smell reached her before her fingers understood. The abscess had burst through the soul at last. Black matter and a stink like nothing on this earth. The whole poultice fouled with it. It was the finest smell the last box had ever offered anybody. "There it is," she said, loud enough to wake Davy. "There it goes, out and done." She flushed the foot clean and packed it soft. Before she had tied off the sacking, the horse's whole great body let go of something it had been holding for 7 months. He stretched flat out on his side, properly flat, unclenched, and slept. Slept and snored, a deep tearing farmyard snore, and Davy laughed out loud in the middle of the night with both hands over his mouth. The 2 hands who slept over the harness room had come down the ladder at the commotion, nightshirts tucked into breeches. They stood at the box door smelling the dreadful triumphant smell. They did not go back up the ladder. One of them fetched the tea instead. It was that one who said it, looking round the box. "That's 4 of us." In the morning the foot was cool for the first time. Ruddock's thumb confirmed it aloud. The pain was out, the leg was filling, the sling was slack at the top of its swing. And Solomon, with a cool foot and a slack rope, did not try to get up. He ate. He watched the door. He let the fuss be made of him. He lay in his deep straw with a cool foot and a full manger, entirely at his ease, trying for nothing. Damaris stood in the box doorway a long while, looking from the horse to the dark end of the row, to the harness room door with its 3 pegs. When she said it to herself. But Davy heard, the hands heard, everyone after them heard it by supper. The foot was the reason he went down. It isn't the reason he stays there. It was Ruddock who caught the proof of the 12th day. He had stumped down the row at evening to stand his usual grim minute at the box door. Solomon was upright in the sling, dozing on his feet, the canvas under his barrel. Ruddock looked, the second look a man gives when the first one surprises him. Then he put his hand up to the beam rope. Rope's slack. It's been slack since the clock struck. He turned his head and said the rest to the whole row, in the voice he used for payday and fire. Day 12, and he's carrying his own weight, all of it. That rope's doing nothing but hang there. A horse in a sling is a horse being helped. A horse in a slack sling is standing. The difference could be seen from the door and checked with one finger, which was exactly how Damaris wanted every piece of good news in that yard. Nothing anybody had to take on trust. 12 nights of watching will make a person strange. At 2 in the morning on that same 12th day, punchy with no sleep, Damaris was doing the last leg rub with an audience of 1 horse, when the wickedness simply came over her. She squared her shoulders, the particular square Ruddock squared them. She gave the sniff, the long, dry, judicial sniff, and she said it, in Ruddock's own flattened vowels, to the horse. A horse that will not rise is a horse that has decided. From the doorway came a small sound, of a man choosing not to have heard what he had certainly heard. Ruddock stood there with a lantern. Behind Ruddock, worse, stood the Duke of Nayland, arrived silent on the cobbles the whole household now knew he walked at night. Damaris straightened up with her heart going like a hoofbeat and shame scolding her right up to the hairline, and nobody died of it. Ruddock let the silence cure a moment longer. "The vowels want work," he said. Then he came in and helped her finish the rub, as if nothing whatever had occurred. His revenge arrived afterward and never left. From that night on, once an evening, he would deliver the line himself, straight-faced, solemn as church. A horse that will not rise, girl, is a horse that has decided. Until the whole yard could say it along with him, and the sentence he had once meant became a joke he meant instead. It was the Duke who did not laugh that night. He stayed when Ruddock went. The 3 o'clock turn came due. Damaris took down the rope. Clement stepped forward out of the shadow of the door and put his hand out for it. "Give it to me," he said. "You have done this alone long enough." She did not give him the rope. She stood holding it, mud on her cheekbone, and told him why, without heat. If a duke turned this horse tonight and slept at the house tomorrow, the yard would learn what it had always half known. The house comes when it suits it, and goes when it likes. Everything down here ran on one currency, showing up when you said you would. Not one night. He can't count, but he can learn what a promise is worth, and so can they. Come every night to the 30th, or don't come. Clement stood a long moment with his hand still out, and nothing in it. Then he gave her the shallow nod dukes give, said good night, and walked back up the dark row alone. Damaris did the turn by herself. Refusing him was right. She had no doubt of that. Right did not keep it from costing. Her arms shook on the rope. The horse came over heavy. The place where a second pair of hands would have been stayed empty. The next evening, before the coat incident could be forgotten, there was another. Davy, folding blankets by lantern light, looked at the harness room door. The whole yard walked past 100 times a day, and said, in the flat conversational voice of a boy not thinking, "That's his coat, the third peg. Lord." The name got halfway up his throat and stopped there. The whole box went still. The two hands looked at the straw. Davy looked at his blanket, appalled at himself. Nobody finished the sentence. Nobody explained why not. Explaining would have come nearer the name than any of them had gone since March. That was the night Ruddock sat down. Midnight, the 13th day. He came down the row in his stockinged feet, with his boots in his hand, a man off duty for the first time in living memory. He lowered himself into the straw against the wall, with his bad knee stretched straight out in front of him. The knee 30 years of mounting blocks had left him. Damaris read it as she read everything. The knee stretched out. The boots sat side by side. A man come to stay. He was quiet a long while. 30 years I've kept this yard, he said at last. I put that boy up on his first pony. I put him up on this horse. And come October, I loaded the pistol in the open, where all of you could watch me do it, so nobody could say afterward it was done tidy and quiet in a corner. That's the whole of my thinking, girl. It wasn't much of a covering, but it was what I had. You brought me the beam rope, Damaris said. I did. First sensible thing I'd done since March. He looked at the horse, upright in his slack sling, and delivered the household's excuse, without malice, straight, without one wasted word. Nobody wanted him dead, girl. They wanted it over. I know it, she said. That's 5. That's 5, Ruddock agreed. Then he reached across without asking and ate half of Davy's bread, because a man who has confessed is entitled to his supper. The night after that, Mrs. Honeysett, who kept the Duke's house, came down past 11 with a can of tea and her opinion of the lamplight. She would not sit. Not yet. But the 3 o'clock tea was hers from that night on. In the small hours of the 19th day, Damaris woke on her straw bale to a sound every yard-bred child is taught to dread. Hooves battering boards, in the dark, in a rhythm with panic in it. Solomon had gone down in the night for his sleep, as he still did between spells in the sling. Rolling in the deep bedding, he had swung himself against the wall. Now he lay jammed there, cast, his legs folded up the wrong side of his body, no room to swing them over. A horse cast against a wall cannot rise. He needs his legs under him, and there is no under to be had. Solomon knew it before she did. He was fighting the boards, scraping hide off his hocks, hammering his own head against the wall in great heaving lunges that got him nothing. She went to his head and got her weight on his neck to slow the thrashing. She could hold him quiet for a minute at a time. She could not move him 1 inch. 1/2 ton, folded wrong, wedged fast. This was past one woman, past two. For the first time in 12 years in that yard, Damaris Trewin went out into the dark and asked for help. She stood in the middle of the sleeping yard and shouted the house awake. "I need every one of you. Now, in your boots." They came, all of them, at a run, in nightshirts stuffed into breeches, in boots on bare feet. The 2 hands, the second horseman, the dairy boy, Mrs. Honeysett in her cap with a shawl over her nightgown. 1 more hand, Davy, Ruddock. 8 at the box mouth, with Damaris making 9. Before the last of them had well stopped, she had the work parcelled out. The box door came off its hinges to make room, 4 hands lifting it away. Damaris knelt on Solomon's neck and held his muzzle clear of the floor, only long enough for the ropes to be set. 2 long, soft ropes went round the fore and rear fetlocks on the side opposite the roll. Everyone but the 2 pullers cleared the box. Those 2 stood in the open doorway, their escape behind them. On the pull, bring the legs over his body and roll him over his back, away from the wall, she said. The moment he passes his withers, drop the ropes and clear the door. Mrs., count us. Mrs. Honeysett planted her feet outside the box and counted the pull. On 3, 1, 2. He came over. As his legs passed his withers, the ropes fell loose and the doorway emptied. 1/2 ton of horse rolled up, over and down onto the open bedding with a boom that shook dust off the beams. 4 minutes from her shout to his freedom. He heaved himself up onto his chest and stayed there, upright at least, blowing like a bellows, a cut over one eye, where he had fought the wall and lost. And there he stopped, chest up, legs under him, everything possible. He did not try to stand. The 9 of them stood in the lantern light and watched him not try. Nobody said anything. At first light, while the yard was still littered with ropes and the door still leaned against the wall, the Duke came down the row with Ruddock behind him, and Ruddock was carrying the pistol case. The night's noise had made the argument for him. He made it kindly. He stood on the horse's offside, as he always stood on the offside. In 7 months, no one had once seen him on the near. He said his piece to her straight. "Look at him. You have done everything, more than any living soul would have done." And he fought a wall in the dark for his trouble. There is a number of days at which patience becomes vanity. I am not going to make an animal do arithmetic for my conscience. Then don't. Do it for the Count. His foot's been cold these 10 days. The rope's been slack since the 12th. He's 2 stone up. He ate off my hand this morning. She stood up beside the horse's head, straw to her elbows, blood from his cut on her sleeve. You want to know what I have besides the Count? 1 thing. 3 years ago, at the far end of this row, I agreed a mare couldn't be saved. Men I trusted said so. I said so with them, and I held her head while it was done. A month after, over the hill, I watched the same hurt walk sound out of another man's yard. Walked out. Sound. She let that sit. I don't agree any more. That's all I've got, Your Grace. I'm not asking you to agree. I'm asking you for 11 more days. The yard did not breathe. Clement looked at the horse a long time. the horse who was watching them both with his one unbloodied eye, furious, upright, alive. 11 days, and the case stays where you can see it. He set the pistol case down on the mounting block with his own hands, square to the edge, in plain view of the last box. And then nobody went back to bed. Nobody decided it. Mrs. Honeysett went to the tack room and lit the stove. Somebody fetched the bread and the dripping. The hands turned buckets over for stools and dragged in a crate. By full dawn, there were 9 people sitting down in the straw and the box mouth around a fallen horse, cross-legged, sprawled, one bad knee stretched straight out, the dairy boy asleep sitting up with his mouth open, uneven as a hedge. Mrs. Honeysett stood in the middle of it counting cups. That's 9 of us then, and tea for 9 wanted. The first cup went into Damaris's own hands. Her fingers would not come steady around it. She got it to her mouth two-handed all the same. It was Damaris, leaning at the doorpost with her hands round her cup, who saw it. 9 people had settled themselves around that horse anyhow, wherever their bones let them. Nowhere planned, nothing arranged, and at the horse's near shoulder there was a place, person-shaped, person-sized, open. She looked at Ruddock. Ruddock looked at his tea. She did not ask. The 20s were the good days, and the last box got loud. By the 22nd day, the vigil had turned into a parish. 9 people could not sit around one horse night after night without becoming what 9 people always become: a small, quarrelsome country with its own politics. The 2 hands had a running argument about oats, crimped against whole, that had somehow lasted the week and made enemies of neither. The second horseman talked about his sister's baby, who was fat, apparently, beyond the ordinary ambitions of babies. There was a card game on the feed bin most nights, played for splinters of kindling, at which Mrs. Honeysett cheated. And in the middle of all of it, twice an evening, when the black horse gathered to rise, the sling took part of his weight and steadied him for a quarter of an hour, his feet on the ground and the rope slack whenever he could carry himself. Solomon in those days was interested in everything. That has no place in account, and it was the best sign she had. It was Davy in the middle of the good noise who asked the question the whole yard had been not asking for a week. He nodded at the open place by the horse's near shoulder, where nobody ever sat, though the box was crowded to the door. "Why does nobody sit there? It's kept," Damaris said. He looked at her. She went on with the bandage in her lap. The card game started up again a little too quickly. The Duke had not been down since the dawn of the 19th day. He had left the case on the mounting block and kept away. Damaris had told herself, twice a night, that it was nothing to her. On the night after Davy's question, he appeared at the box door at the low hour, past 2, when she had sent the others to their beds and was rigging the turning rope alone. He did not offer this time. He put his hand on the rope. "Give me the rope." "Every night?" Damaris said. "Every night to the 30th. So she gave him the rope, and the Duke of Nayland learned the 3-hour turn of a down horse at the hands of the woman his own book called a dairymaid. He was bad at it. He put his weight where his shoulder wanted instead of where the horse needed. She corrected him with 2 fingers on his elbow, the way she'd have corrected Davy. He took the correction like a man being knighted. The second time went better. The great body came over. The horse sighed his straw-scented sigh. The 2 of them ended up on their knees in the lamplight, either side of half a ton of gelding, their hands a rope's width apart in the dark. His knuckle went tight on the rope before he said it. "May I kiss you?" Clement asked. "Not while that case is on the mounting block." He nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something he had hoped about the world. He did not argue. He did not go and move the case either, then or after. She marked that he understood why not. Move tonight. It was not a mercy. It was a bribe. 3 feet away, against the wall, Ruddock lay rolled in a horse rug where he had gone down for his hour's sleep between turns. His breathing never changed. Neither of them looked at him once. "I will tell you the thing I came down to say," Clement said, quiet across the horse's dark back. "If he is dead by morning, I will stand in this yard and ask you the same question I mean to ask you now." Damaris heard it, the whole of it, and did not let it knock her hands off their work. "Then you'd best get some sleep, Your Grace," she said. "You're on the rope again tomorrow night." He was, and every night after, to the end. Somewhere in the middle of the 20s there was a night with nothing in it. No test was set. No deadline was argued. When the midnight turn was done, Clement sat down against the wall beside her and brought out the heel of the loaf Mrs. Honeysett had left with the tea. He broke it and handed her the bigger half. The bread was stale enough to want working at, and neither of them minded. "That horse can slip a knot," Clement said, with his eyes on the dozing ears. "He taught himself the trick as a young one. My brother knew, and told nobody. He let Ruddock stand in the rain, doubling every hitch on the row and hunting a thief through the feed-room. And he agreed gravely that some person unknown was at the corn. He was feeding the thief the evidence the whole while. I have never once told Ruddock the truth of it." Damaris laughed, low, into the bread. In a month of nights, she had not heard him string so many words together, nor waste one of them. The story burned down with the lamp. Clement looked at the horse a long moment before he spoke again. "I kept him fed because feeding him let me say I had not abandoned him," he said. "Then I shut the door because looking hurt. I called the arrangement rest. It was abandonment, and the order was mine. Damaris did not tell him it was otherwise. She put the last of the bread into his hand instead. 'You're on the rope now,' she said. 'The count runs forward. It doesn't run back.'" On the 29th day, at dusk, with the whole company assembled and the tea going round, Solomon did the thing that broke the yard's heart open at last. He had been off his sling an hour, resting on his chest. Without a sound, without a signal, without anything in the box changing at all, he set his forelegs out, dragged his hindquarters 2 full feet across the bedding, and stopped, blowing hard, pointed like a compass needle at the harness room door. Then he lay still, facing it, watching it. Nobody spoke. The cards stopped. Mrs. Honeysett's cup sat in the air, halfway to her mouth. Damaris put her hand flat on his neck and said the thing the whole yard had spent since March not saying. "He isn't waiting to die. He's waiting for somebody to come through that door and say his name." Clement stood up. He stood up too carefully. He walked out of the box, into the black yard, and stopped somewhere on the cobbles where none of them could see his face. Damaris stayed where she was, her hand on the horse. She had said it to the whole ring of them. It had only ever been for one person. She let him take it into the dark alone. It was Davy who broke the silence, in the practical voice of the young. He stood in front of the horse and turned his own coat pocket inside out, showing the lining, a crumb, a bit of string. "It's empty. I never have any. What's he after?" "Somebody used to," Damaris said, "and no more than that." She banked the lamp low when they finally slept. The boy against the wall, Ruddock in his rug, the horse breathing long and even, facing the door. She sat at his head and counted what there was to count. The foot, cold. The rope, slack. The flesh coming. The reason, out in the dark of the yard where she could not help him with it. "The 30th day is tomorrow," she said to the horse, out loud, because facts were the kindness she knew. And the case is still on the block. First light came up cold and gold through the open door of the last box. What the light of the 30th day found was this. 9 people sat in the deep straw and the box mouth around a black horse lying easy with his head up. Nothing about them was tidy. Some sat cross-legged. Mrs. Honeysett had her crate. The second horseman was on an upturned bucket that had not improved his temper. One of the hands slept sitting up against the doorpost with his mouth open. Ruddock's bad knee was stretched out in front of him like a fence rail. Their breath showed. The horse's breath showed. Damaris sat at his head with her sleeves pushed up and her hands under his jaw, straw in her hair, 30 nights old about the eyes. And at the horse's near shoulder, in a box packed to the door, there was one place nobody sat in. There had been all along. Boots on the row cobbles. The Duke of Nayland came down the length of his stable row in the dawn, carrying the pistol case in his own hand. Every head turned. Nobody stood up. The whole box watched him come, the case swinging black at his side. Clement stopped at the door. He looked at the 9 of them, at the horse, at her. Then he bent and set the pistol case down on the cobbles outside the door. Outside it. And he stepped into the straw. He crossed the box the way you cross a church, went to the horse's near shoulder, and lowered himself into the one empty place. A duke, sitting down into muck, on the near side, the side he had not been able to look at since a March morning at a flooded ford. Now the great rebuilt body of his brother's horse breathed against his arm. "Is this place taken?" "It's been kept." Straw settled under the Duke's weight. The horse's nostril flared once at the new smell beside him. "That's 10, Davy said, under his breath to nobody. It was Ruddock who stood up and delivered what he had plainly been sitting on all night. "Before anything else happens in this box," he said, to the company at large, "you'll all know what I heard, because I was 3 feet off and no more asleep than the beam. Earlier in the 20s, His Grace said to her, with the horse still down, mind, and nothing in the world to show for the month, that if the horse was dead by morning, he would stand in this yard and ask her the same question all the same. I heard it plain. I'd swear it anywhere." He looked at the Duke. "Folk should know what a thing is before they watch it happen." "Thank you, Ruddock," Clement said from the straw, meaning every word of it. Then Ruddock did his other duty. He went to the near hind, put his thumb on the coronet in front of every witness, and gave his evidence. "That foot was hot for 9 days, and it's been cold for 21. My thumb has been on it every morning of the 30. It's cold." He lifted the sling rope where it hung, showing the slack, an arm's length of nothing. "And the rope's been slack since the 12th. Whatever stands up this morning stands up on his own 4 legs. "Then he won't be wanting this," Damaris said. She got up, went to the beam, and untied the knots she had tied a month before. Nobody helped her. Nobody touched the horse. The sling had hung empty above him since he last stood in it. It held him up no more than the roof did. She hauled the canvas down, dragged it out of the straw, and dropped it in the row. From here, if he rose on nothing but himself. Then she did what she had done every night of the month. She knelt at his head, put her hands under his jaw, and waited. She did not cluck, coax, call, or make any sound at all that a horse could take for an instruction. She had never once asked him with her voice. She was not going to begin on the 30th morning. The box went so silent the frost could be heard easing off the roof. Solomon gathered himself. The forelegs came out, the great neck swung, the hind quarters heaved. It failed. He sat back into the straw, blowing. Nobody moved. Damaris's hand stayed under his jaw. He rested. Anyone in that box could see how angry he was. He gathered again, and the black horse came up off the floor of the last box. 4 legs, then a lurch, then the near hind planted square under him, taking weight, holding it. Up, entire, swaying, standing free of the sling in the grey-gold light. For the first time since the order was signed. 1, Davy said, half-strangled. 2, 3, and the yard came in on it, the whole company counting out loud together the way they had counted the pull on the rope. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And at 10 Davy shouted, 12, with tears all over his face, and nobody corrected him. A bucket went over. Mrs. Honeysett sat straight down in the straw, crate and dignity abandoned. One of the hands stood with both fists on top of his head. Ruddock turned his face to the wall and kept it there. What he did against that wall was joy, and his own business. Clement got up out of the straw with chaff all over him. He did not brush it off. He stood beside the standing horse, put one hand flat on the black neck, and said it. Wilfrid. His name was Wilfrid, and this is Wilfrid's horse, and I have not said either name in this yard since March. The Duke walked to the harness-room door and opened it himself, wide. At the sound of it coming open, Solomon's ears came round. The horse went to it. 4 steps, slow, each leg finding out it worked. He stopped in the open doorway. He pushed his nose at the coat on the 3rd peg, at the left pocket of it, the old habit, the old hope. The pocket hung flat and empty. He stood there with his nose in it anyway. The household watched a horse remember, and let him. Then, having found the pocket empty, Solomon did the most horse thing in the world. He walked on, out through the far door after the smell of morning, into the wide cobbled yard beyond the arch, into the full risen sun, and the entire household walked out after him, out to where the light was, on the bright cobbles, with the horse blinking in the middle of everything. Clement turned to face her. Damaris held up one hand before he could speak. Before you say anything else, Your Grace, you'll hear my terms, and so will they. Say them. 1. That horse is never destroyed for being of no use. He keeps his box and his grass here for good, and this yard says his name. 2. Anything on this estate that goes down gets a fair trial of 30 days before it gets the pistol, so long as it can be kept comfortable and the count keeps coming right. 3. I keep my cottage and my work, and I don't stop being the one the yard sends for. 4. She looked at him. Nobody marries me for getting a horse up. Granted, Clement said. All 4. Before this whole household, granted. And then the Duke of Nayland went down on one knee, on his own cobbles, in the full sun, beside the standing horse, in front of his entire household. Damaris Trewin, in front of my whole house, will you marry me? Yes, not for the horse, for the man who sat down. Clement's hand found hers first, hard, before the yard could move. Now? He asked. Now, Damaris said. Then he kissed her, with the mounting block standing empty behind them. What that yard did then had not been done in it in living memory. The hands cheered until the pigeons went up off the roof. Mrs. Honeysett cried into her apron. Davy ran the full length of the row, shouting it to the horses, box by box. Ruddock took his hat off, looked at it, found nothing to be done with a hat at such a time, and put it back on. The pistol case still sat on the cobbles by the door. Ruddock fetched it up and looked at the Duke. Draw the charge, Clement said. The pond is deep enough. Ruddock drew it on the mounting block, powder and ball. The pond took the rest. It never came up again. On the 12th of December, The stable yard of Nayland Court was full of low winter sun, trestle tables, and people who were all supposed to be somewhere else. There had been a wedding that morning. The evidence was everywhere. The household in its best clothes getting gravy on them, food going down the long trestle by the arch, the hands laughing too loudly at the second horseman's one joke. In the middle of the yard, in a good wool rug with his head over the rail, stood a black gelding, watching the food in the manner of a horse who has learned exactly where his luck is kept. The banns had been cried on the 3 Sundays before, in the parish church where both of them lived. The marriage settlement secured the cottage and her animal work earnings to her sole and separate use. "Her Grace says the mash is to be wetter," Mrs. Honeysett announced, coming out of the tack room with the air of a woman carrying the law. Then, forgetting herself completely, over her shoulder, "Damaris, the mash." Nobody corrected her, Her Grace least of all. The new Duchess of Nayland was at the wash-yard wall in her wedding dress with her sleeves pushed up. The canvas lay coiled on its own peg now, kept like a tool and not like a relic. A man from a neighbouring yard had walked over because a cart mare was too weak to rise. Damaris had examined her. Ruddock would go back with him to sound the beam and rig the canvas. "The beam takes the weight," Damaris told him, "and the padded breast and hind straps keep the canvas from sliding. Ruddock will rig it. It never lifts the horse clear. It lends only what the horse can use." Solomon had done his turns of the yard that morning, one more for each week since he stood, escorted by wedding guests who had no business being there and would not go in. He did the turns badly, cutting every corner toward the trestle. Then, while the second horseman was retelling the joke, he reached his whole neck out and stole half a loaf off the end board, and got away with it at a walk, because who was going to run in wedding clothes? 11 years old, Ruddock said to the neighbour, nodding at the thief. "And a dozen more in him, the farrier says. God help this table." It was Ruddock, too, who gave the yard's law, before the Duke could open his mouth to do it. He said it in the voice he used for payday and fire. "Nothing goes down in this yard and gets the pistol before it's examined. If it can be kept comfortable, it gets a fair trial of 30 days, and it keeps them so long as it keeps mending. That's the rule here now." At the trestle, the company sat where it always sat, on whatever came to hand. The 2 hands shoulder to shoulder, the dairy boy on a crate, Mrs. Honeysett enthroned on the one good chair. There was a place at the end where nobody happened to be sitting. Mrs. Honeysett kept setting food down on it, a heel of pie, a cut of cheese, until the plate at that place was the fullest at the table. Nobody remarked on it. Nobody minded it. The dogs did well out of it by evening, and through all of it moved the Duke of Nayland, working on his own wedding day, in a coat that did not fit him quite right across the shoulders. It was the coat from the 3rd peg. He had taken it down that morning, before church, and put it on over his wedding clothes when they came back to the yard. It was a working coat. He was working in it, hauling a trestle bench, good cuffs shoved up. In the left pocket was a fat handful of apples. When a lad ran the pump at the trough, the water climbing loud, the Duke's sentence carried straight on through the sound of it. Solomon worked his way down the yard toward that coat with the patience of a professional. He came up behind the Duke and pushed his nose, without one flicker of doubt, into the left pocket. Clement stood entirely still and let him. The whole yard pretended not to watch, and watched. Damaris came over from the wash-yard wall, straw in her hair on her own wedding day. Clement reached out and took the straw from her hair without asking, and the 2 of them stood in the low gold light, with a horse's whole head buried to the cheekbones in that left-hand pocket. Left pocket. I know.